Imagine this: a beloved American icon, a football legend, a man who once graced cereal boxes and movie screens, now sitting in the back of a white Ford Bronco with a gun to his head, the entire nation watching in stunned silence. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't fiction. It was June 17, 1994, and over 95 million people tuned in, not for the Super Bowl, not for a presidential address, but for a slow-speed police chase. A former sports hero, now the most wanted man in America, rolling down the Los Angeles freeway as helicopters swarmed above and spectators lined the overpasses. Some cheering, some crying, all watching. This was not just another criminal case. This was a cultural earthquake. A pair of bloodstained gloves, a murder scene soaked in horror, and a nation split down the middle. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about trust, about truth, about how deeply race, celebrity, and power could fracture public opinion. The trial that followed wasn't confined to a courtroom. It spilled into living rooms, barbershops, classrooms, and courtrooms across the country. It wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was the most televised, scrutinized, and dissected court case in modern history. This is the story of the trial that changed everything. The players, the politics, the power. This is the OJ Simpson Trial. And what you're about to hear is not just about a man accused of murder. It's about how the justice system, the media, and the American public collided in a way that would leave a scar on the national psyche forever. Before the headlines, before the trial, before the sirens and flashing lights, there was Orenthal James Simpson. Born in the projects of San Francisco, Simpson rose from humble beginnings to become the embodiment of the American dream. A lightning-fast running back with a smile that could sell anything, from rental cars to razors. On the football field, he was a force of nature. He shattered records, earning a Heisman Trophy at USC and later becoming the first NFL player to rush for over 2,000 yards in a single season. He didn't just play the game, he redefined it. But OJ wasn't content with just being a sports hero. After retiring from the NFL, he parlayed his fame into an acting career. He starred in films like The Naked Gun and appeared regularly on TV. He became a commentator for Monday Night Football, a fixture at high society events, a man who navigated Hollywood just as smoothly as he once sliced through defensive lines. Charismatic, well-spoken, polished. He was welcomed in circles few black men at the time ever reached. And then there was Nicole. Nicole Brown was just 18 when she met OJ while working as a waitress at a Beverly Hills restaurant. He was 30, already married. But that didn't stop the affair. By 1985, OJ had divorced his first wife, Marguerite, and married Nicole. To the world, they looked like the picture-perfect couple. Blonde, beautiful, always smiling in public. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. In 1989, police responded to a domestic violence call. Nicole had been beaten, visibly bruised and terrified. OJ was arrested, and he later pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to community service and counseling. But that wasn't the end of it. Far from it. Nicole kept a diary, pages that detailed the years of fear, the bruises, the threats. She told friends and family she feared for her life. She said OJ was jealous, controlling, dangerous. The glamorous facade was starting to crack. By 1992, the marriage was over. Nicole filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. But the separation didn't bring peace. In fact, the tension only grew. Phone calls, late-night visits, explosive arguments. OJ still had keys to her house. He still felt entitled to her life. And Nicole, despite her efforts to move on, was never really free of him. Behind the designer sunglasses and Malibu mansions, something darker was brewing. Something more sinister than the media could see. Something that would come to a violent head on a warm summer night in 1994. This was no longer the story of a football legend. This was the making of a suspect. And every perfect photograph, every red carpet smile, was about to be burned under the white-hot glare of public suspicion. June 12, 1994. It was a Sunday evening in Brentwood, one of Los Angeles's most affluent neighborhoods. The sun had long dipped below the Pacific horizon when Nicole Brown Simpson returned to her home at 875 South Bundy Drive with her children after a dance recital. It was supposed to be a quiet night, but within hours, that peaceful neighborhood would become the epicenter of the most infamous crime scene in modern American history. At around 10:15 p.m., Nicole and her friend, Ron Goldman, were brutally murdered just outside her condominium. Goldman, a 25-year-old restaurant waiter, had stopped by to return a pair of eyeglasses Nicole's mother had left at the restaurant where he worked. It was a kind gesture, a quick errand. He had no idea he was walking into a death sentence. What happened next was savage. Nicole was found at the bottom of the stairs, nearly decapitated. Her throat slashed so deep, she was almost beheaded. Ron's body was nearby, stabbed repeatedly, his defensive wounds suggesting he fought back with everything he had. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't a professional hit. It was personal, angry, intimate. Around 10:45 p.m., a neighbor noticed Nicole's Akita, a white dog, wandering the street, blood on its paws. The dog's whining led another neighbor back to the townhouse. And there, behind the black iron gate, they discovered the bodies. By 12:10 a.m., the LAPD was on the scene. Within minutes, they realized this was no ordinary double homicide. This was Nicole Brown Simpson, the ex-wife of OJ Simpson. And almost instantly, the lens turned toward him. Meanwhile, across town on Rockingham Avenue, a man named Cato Kalin, an out-of-work actor and friend of OJ, was staying in the guest house behind Simpson's estate. Around the same time of the murders, he heard a loud thump outside his wall. He would later describe it as something hitting the wall, something strange, something he couldn't explain. At 4:30 a.m., police went to notify OJ Simpson, hoping to deliver the tragic news. But OJ wasn't home. He was on a red-eye flight to Chicago, booked at the very last minute. Officers found a white Ford Bronco parked outside his mansion, its interior speckled with what looked like blood. A single glove was discovered behind the house, soaked in blood. Later, a matching glove would be found at the crime scene on Bundy Drive. They were the same make, same size. The kind of gloves Nicole had once bought for OJ. A trail of blood led from the driveway, through the home, into the bathroom, and out again. Then came the footprints. Size 12 Bruno Magli shoes. Rare, expensive. Only a few hundred pairs sold in the U.S. And Simpson wore that size. Inside the Bronco, investigators found blood. On the console, on the door, on the carpeting. It was a forensic treasure trove. Blood from both victims and from OJ himself. By mid-morning on June 13th, the LAPD had a suspect. They didn't say it out loud, not yet, but inside the station it was obvious. That night, the country didn't yet know what had happened, but the fuse had been lit, and in the days that followed, America would find itself glued to every development, every new twist, as the tragic slayings of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman spiraled into something no one could have imagined, a national obsession, where justice, fame, and race collided under a blinding spotlight. June 17, 1994. 5 days after the murders, OJ Simpson was supposed to turn himself in. By 11 a.m. that Friday morning, the LAPD had officially charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. His attorney, Robert Shapiro, assured police that Simpson would surrender voluntarily. The media gathered outside Parker Center, the police headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, waiting for the moment the famed football star would walk through those doors in handcuffs. But OJ didn't show up. By 2 p.m., panic had set in. Simpson had vanished. The LAPD issued an all-points bulletin. At a press conference later that afternoon, a frustrated LAPD commander took to the microphone and uttered a line that would echo through the decades. OJ Simpson is a fugitive of justice. Then came the twist. At around 6:20 p.m., a white Ford Bronco was spotted on Interstate 405 heading south, driven by Simpson's longtime friend and former teammate, Al Cowlings. In the back seat, OJ was holding a gun to his own head. The Bronco wasn't speeding. It was crawling along the freeway at 35 miles per hour, trailed by dozens of squad cars and helicopters. News networks cut away from scheduled programming, including Game 5 of the NBA Finals, to carry the chase live. Over 95 million people tuned in. Offices emptied, bars packed. Strangers crowded around department store televisions in hushed disbelief. Some people lined the overpasses with signs of support. Go OJ, go. Others watched in stunned silence, unsure of what they were seeing. Was it a suicide in progress? A confession? A farewell tour? Inside the Bronco, Simpson was reportedly weeping, holding a framed photo of his children. He had a passport, a fake beard, and nearly $9,000 in cash. He told Cowlings he just wanted to go home, to see his mother, to say goodbye. The chase ended outside his Rockingham estate, over 2 hours after it began. Police coaxed him out of the vehicle after nearly an hour of negotiations. The nation exhaled as OJ emerged, disheveled, drained, but alive. He was taken into custody and booked at the Parker Center just before midnight. It was the strangest, most haunting parade Los Angeles had ever seen. A fallen hero driven through the heart of the city he once ruled, as millions watched a live Greek tragedy unfold in real time. The slow-speed chase wasn't just a bizarre chapter. It was the ignition point. The moment America realized this wasn't going to be a normal trial. It was going to be a spectacle, a national reckoning. By the next morning, the media had dubbed it the trial of the century. OJ Simpson, once known for dodging tacklers and selling orange juice, was now the most infamous defendant in the world. And the stage for a legal showdown unlike any other was officially set. In the early hours of June 18, 1994, OJ Simpson, once the most beloved athlete in America, was booked into jail at the Parker Center. The charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder. Bail was denied, and the mugshot, featuring a hollow-eyed Simpson in a blue jumpsuit, would soon be etched into the national consciousness. As the days passed, what had already felt surreal began transforming into something even bigger. The media frenzy intensified. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Journalists from across the globe descended on Los Angeles. It was no longer just about justice. It was about history, drama, ratings. On July 22nd, OJ appeared in court for his formal arraignment. The courtroom was silent. The nation watched live as he stood and said 2 words, "Not guilty." And with that, the war was on. Behind the scenes, 2 legal armies began to form. On one side, the prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorneys Marcia Clark and Chris Darden. Smart, fierce, focused. Their case would be simple. They said OJ Simpson was a violent man. Nicole had been afraid. There was a documented history of abuse. And now, 2 people were dead. Clark was methodical, determined to paint Simpson not as a hero, but as a man with a motive. She believed the timeline, the blood evidence, and OJ's past would speak for themselves. Darden, brought in later, added strength to the argument of domestic violence. Together, they believed the case was strong, almost overwhelming. But on the other side stood the dream team. Robert Shapiro, a master negotiator. F. Lee Bailey, legendary for his cross-examinations. Alan Dershowitz, a constitutional scholar and appellate wizard. And then there was Johnny Cochran. Cochran was charismatic, poetic, a courtroom performer. He had represented celebrities before, but nothing like this. He knew how to connect with a jury, not through cold logic, but emotion, rhythm, cadence. His strategy wasn't just to defend OJ, it was to indict the system, the LAPD, the racial inequalities baked into the structure of justice. Then there was Robert Kardashian, a longtime friend of OJ's, not just a member of the team, but a symbol of loyalty, sitting silently beside his friend, often visibly shaken, a witness to a collapse playing out in real time. The Dream Team strategy? Attack the evidence, raise doubt, suggest that OJ was being framed, that the LAPD had planted evidence, that racism, not reason, was guiding this prosecution. Before the trial even began, the defense was already laying groundwork for their key point. OJ Simpson was a target of a corrupt and racially biased police force. And the person they would focus their aim on was Detective Mark Fuhrman. But before that could unfold in front of the world, the legal chessboard had to be set. One of the first battles was over DNA evidence. At the time, DNA testing was new, misunderstood, even feared by many. The prosecution believed it would be their ace. Blood from Simpson, Nicole, and Goldman found at the scene, in Simpson's car, and at his home. But the defense didn't deny the blood existed. Instead, they questioned how it got there. The LAPD, they claimed, was sloppy, contaminated samples, mishandled vials, and maybe, just maybe, intentional tampering. Then came the venue. The trial was moved from Santa Monica, where Nicole was murdered, to downtown Los Angeles. The jury pool would now be drawn from a population that was far more diverse, more urban, more distrustful of law enforcement. This change would shape everything that followed. The jury would be sequestered, cut off from the world. 12 citizens who would become some of the most watched people in America. Their every reaction, every facial twitch, every note taken, analyzed endlessly by pundits and viewers alike. And in the wings, millions waited, not just for justice, but for drama, for answers, for blood. What was once a murder trial was now an American obsession. The question wasn't just did he do it? It was who would win? The lawyers? The media? The truth? The curtain was about to rise on the greatest legal theater the world had ever seen. January 24th, 1995. The world held its breath as court was called into session. After months of investigation, arguments, and pre-trial motions, the moment had arrived. Cameras were in place. Reporters leaned forward, and 12 jurors stared straight ahead, unaware their lives were about to become as scrutinized as the man sitting at the defense table. OJ Simpson sat silently, flanked by his attorneys. He wore a dark suit, his expression unreadable, stoic, controlled. The prosecution was first. Marcia Clark rose to speak, her voice calm, composed, but brimming with purpose. She began by laying out the cold facts. This was, she told the jury, a case of overwhelming physical evidence. Blood, hair, fibers, a timeline so tight it left no room for alternative explanations. She pointed to the glove found at Rockingham, OJ's estate, and its match discovered at the murder scene. She outlined how DNA tests revealed blood from Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman smeared inside OJ's white Bronco. Blood drops at the crime scene matched Simpson's DNA. She emphasized the cuts on his fingers the next day, the missing time in his alibi, the suspicious flight to Chicago, booked just hours after the murders. To Clark and her team, the narrative was clear. It was rage. It was personal. It was murder. And it was OJ Simpson. But then it was Johnny Cochran's turn. And everything changed. He didn't start with evidence. He started with the police, with the system, with America's long, painful history of racial injustice. Cochran's voice was steady, his rhythm magnetic. He spoke directly to the jury, not just as a lawyer, but as a man who understood what it meant to be watched, profiled, and wrongfully accused. He didn't call OJ a saint. He didn't have to. Instead, he asked a different question. Can you trust the people who brought this evidence forward? He began to paint a different picture, not of a murderer, but of a man being framed. He pointed fingers at the LAPD, and specifically at one name, Mark Fuhrman. Fuhrman, a lead detective in the case, had been one of the first officers on the scene. He was the one who found the infamous glove behind Simpson's guest house. But who was he, really? Cochran suggested the jury would soon see, and what they'd see would shake their faith in the very foundation of the case. He told them, if you don't believe the messenger, you can't believe the message. And that message, according to the defense, was riddled with corruption, from contaminated evidence to missing samples, to a rush to judgment. The glove? Perhaps planted. The blood? Mishandled. The entire investigation? Biased, broken, and built on the presumption of guilt. Cochran's words weren't just an opening statement. They were a sermon. And the courtroom was his congregation. He wasn't defending OJ Simpson the celebrity. He was defending every black man who had ever been falsely accused, every citizen who had ever feared the flashing lights in their rearview mirror, every juror who had ever wondered what justice really meant. By the time both sides finished, the room felt different. It was no longer just a battle between two legal teams. It was a collision between worlds, one rooted in science, evidence, and reason, and the other in experience, emotion, and injustice. And the jury, caught in the middle, now faced the greatest responsibility of their lives, deciding whether this man, this fallen icon, was guilty of two horrific murders or the victim of a corrupt system and a rush to convict. The trial had officially begun, and America could not look away. The OJ Simpson trial had become more than just court proceedings. It was now primetime television, a legal soap opera unfolding live every day in front of millions. And as each witness took the stand, the case veered further from simple questions of guilt and deeper into the murky waters of perception, race, and credibility. And then came Mark Fuhrman, a decorated LAPD detective and one of the first officers to visit Simpson's estate after the murders. It was Fuhrman who claimed to have discovered the infamous bloody glove behind the guest house. That glove, prosecutors believed, linked OJ directly to the crime scene. But when Fuhrman took the stand, something fell off. He was sharp, too sharp, controlled, confident, too confident. The defense smelled blood. Lee Bailey pressed Fuhrman hard about his conduct, about his motivations, about his language. Under oath, Fuhrman stated that he had never used the N-word in the past 10 years, and that would become his undoing, because the defense had tapes, old recordings made years earlier, where Fuhrman casually, repeatedly used racial slurs. Not only that, he bragged about planting evidence, beating suspects, hating interracial couples. The tapes shattered his credibility. The courtroom gasped. The jury listened in stunned silence. Everything the prosecution had built, every forensic breadcrumb, every photograph, every theory, was suddenly tainted. If the lead detective lied about this, what else had he lied about? Johnny Cochran would later call Fuhrman the personification of evil. And in that moment, even those unsure of Simpson's guilt began to question whether they could trust the case laid before them. But the defense wasn't finished. Enter Brian Cato Kalin, the affable, slightly eccentric house guest living in OJ's backyard bungalow. With his shaggy blonde hair and surfer boy vibe, Cato became an unlikely media darling. He wasn't just a witness, he was a spectacle. He testified about hearing bumps outside his wall the night of the murders. Sounds he couldn't explain. And while he didn't place OJ at the scene, his statements fueled speculation. Was OJ creeping around the property that night? Had Cato almost caught him? Then came the scientists. The prosecution brought in DNA experts. They explained how blood samples from the crime scene matched OJ's, how Nicole's blood was found on OJ's socks, how Ron's blood was in the Bronco. It should have been the death blow. But DNA was still a mystery to many in 1995. It was complex, foreign, easy to misunderstand, and the defense capitalized on that confusion. They didn't have to disprove the evidence, only make the jury unsure of it. They emphasized lab errors, contamination, mishandled samples. And as each day passed, doubt spread like wildfire. But no moment would define this trial more than what happened on June 15th, 1995. OJ was asked to try on the gloves. The prosecution believed it would be a defining moment. Proof. The gloves, they argued, were his. They had found them at the crime scene and at his estate, bloodied, damning. But when Simpson stood in front of the jury, pulled the leather over his fingers, they didn't fit. He struggled, frowned, stretched his hands wide. It was awkward enough to make the jurors squint, frown, shift. And then Cochran delivered the line that would echo for decades. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The phrase was more than catchy. It was devastating. In 6 words, Cochran had reframed the entire trial. It wasn't about murder anymore. It was about doubt, reasonable doubt. In his closing argument, Cochran brought the trial full circle. He reminded the jury not just of the evidence, but of the system, of how a broken institution could make a broken case. He painted OJ not as a killer, but as a victim of racism, bias, and a desperate LAPD looking to close a high-profile case. His words hit like thunder. The defense hadn't just raised questions, they had created a new story. One where truth was fluid, and justice was no longer black and white. The jury would now decide if the story they'd been told was one they could believe, or if, like so much in America at the time, it had been built on a lie. October 3rd, 1995. Day 252 of the trial. Outside the courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, thousands had gathered: press, protesters, spectators. Inside, the 12 jurors, 9 black, 2 white, 1 Hispanic, took their seats. The world was watching. Offices came to a halt. Classrooms wheeled out televisions. Court TV hit record-breaking viewership. Even the New York Stock Exchange paused as traders leaned into monitors, waiting for the words. OJ Simpson stood. The courtroom clerk spoke. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187. Gasps, shouts, cheers, cries, and silence. Simpson exhaled. He mouthed thank you. His attorneys hugged him. Robert Kardashian, his once close friend, stood frozen, expressionless, staring straight ahead as if something inside him had broken. The courtroom was electric. Outside, jubilation and fury erupted in equal measure. In South Los Angeles, people danced in the streets, clapping and honking car horns. A celebration of justice, of vindication, of a black man beating a system so often rigged against him. But in Beverly Hills and in much of white America, there was outrage, disbelief. To them, the verdict felt like an insult, an injustice of epic proportions. 2 people had been savagely murdered, and yet the man at the center of it all was walking free. The country split in two. Polls taken in the days that followed revealed the truth behind the spectacle. 75% of black Americans believed OJ had been framed. Nearly the same percentage of white Americans believed he was guilty. It wasn't just a legal decision. It was a mirror held up to the nation, reflecting deep scars of race, justice, and belief. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The reaction rippled around the world. Foreign governments commented. In a surreal twist, Margaret Thatcher even asked President Bill Clinton what he thought of the verdict during a diplomatic visit. Newspapers in France, South Africa, and Japan splashed the story across front pages. Simpson's face was everywhere, both a hero and a villain, depending on where you stood. In living rooms across America, the verdict didn't just end a trial. It began a national argument about trust, about fairness, about whether justice truly is blind. For some, it was a moment of triumph over centuries of racial injustice. For others, it was proof that fame, money, and manipulation could override truth. No one walked away unchanged. And while the court had spoken, the wounds of that October morning would linger for years, etched not only into the memory of a nation, but into its very soul. Though O.J. Simpson walked out of criminal court a free man, the legal storm was far from over. In 1997, 2 years after the not guilty verdict, Ron Goldman's family and Nicole Brown's estate filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Simpson in civil court. The standard here was different. No longer beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, it was the preponderance of evidence. A much lower bar. This time, there were no theatrics, no primetime coverage, no daily headlines or courtroom cameras. Just a quieter, relentless pursuit of accountability. And the jury believed them. They found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown. He was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages. The Goldmans, who had watched in agony as the criminal trial unraveled, finally had a verdict they could live with. But it wasn't closure, and it certainly wasn't justice in full. Simpson, for his part, continued to maintain his innocence. Publicly, repeatedly, over the years, he released a controversial book titled, "If I Did It, a hypothetical retelling of the murders that felt like a cruel joke to many. The book was pulled, reissued, and eventually rebranded under the Goldman's control. Profits funneled toward the judgment he had barely begun to pay. But karma has a curious way of keeping receipts. In 2007, Simpson found himself back in the headlines, and this time back in handcuffs. The scene was Las Vegas. Simpson and a group of men stormed into a hotel room, attempting to retrieve sports memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him. But this wasn't a civil dispute. The incident involved guns, threats, chaos. He was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including armed robbery and kidnapping. This time, there were no dream teams, no press conferences, no Cochran, no theatrics. In 2008, he was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 33 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after 9. For many, it felt like long-delayed justice, a second chance at accountability. He served 9 years at Lovelock Correctional Center in Nevada and was granted parole in 2017. OJ Simpson walked free once again, but he was a different man, older, heavier, a ghost of the icon he once was. Legally, he had fulfilled his sentence, but in the court of public opinion, he remained permanently on trial. He lived the rest of his life under the weight of two legacies, one forged on the football field and the other in a courtroom stained with blood. By the time the OJ Simpson trial ended, the world was no longer the same. Courtrooms had become stages, lawyers, actors, trials, entertainment. It was the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, as we know it. A media frenzy that never really died down, only shifted, mutated, and grew. The Simpson case blurred the line between journalism and spectacle, turning a double homicide into television's most-watched drama. Reality news was born. Networks learned they didn't need scripts to hold attention. They needed tension. A villain, a hero, a mystery. And OJ Simpson, charismatic, polarizing, and infamous, was all of those things rolled into one. Cameras in courtrooms, once unthinkable, became the norm. The trial became the blueprint for modern coverage. From Casey Anthony to Johnny Depp, every high-profile case since has borrowed from the Simpson playbook. Legal drama became a staple of pop culture, and America never looked away again. But the trial wasn't just a media event. It was a mirror, and what it reflected was a country deeply divided. The Simpson case laid bare the stark differences in how black and white Americans viewed the justice system. It forced painful conversations about race, power, and policing. The LAPD, already under scrutiny after the Rodney King beating just a few years prior, was now on trial in the court of public opinion. The Furman tapes, the alleged corruption, the racial undertones, it all reinforced what many in the black community had long believed, that justice was not equally served. For white Americans, the verdict felt like a miscarriage of justice. For many black Americans, it was a rare moment of triumph in a system that so often failed them. The echoes of that divide still ripple through society today. But the story didn't end with the trial. OJ remained a fixture in the public imagination, whether he wanted to or not. Books, documentaries, podcasts. The Emmy-winning series American Crime Story brought the drama to a new generation, each retelling a reminder that this wasn't just about one man, but about a moment in time that redefined an entire nation. And in April 2024, the final chapter closed. OJ Simpson died at the age of 76. Some mourned, some shrugged, some remembered a Heisman winner, others remembered a courtroom defendant. A man celebrated and reviled. A man who lived two lives, one before 1994 and one after. But whether you believed he was guilty or innocent, framed or free, one thing was undeniable. OJ Simpson left behind a legacy that America will never forget. Not because of the fame, not even because of the verdict, but because his trial forced us all to confront who we were and who we still are. If this story has both fascinated and horrified you, remember, true crime is far from over. In fact, the next story we're going to explore might be even more shocking. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button to stay up to date with more real-life stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Remember to leave your comment and thoughts below. The dark truths behind some of the most chilling crimes are just beginning. Stay tuned. The next story is waiting, and it's one that'll send a shiver down your spine. Thanks for watching.